Hello, I'm Sterling Edwards. Let's take a few minutes and paint some clouds. Skies in a landscape can be very dramatic, and there are as many different types of clouds as there are landscapes. What I want to do right now, instead of trying to cover the whole gamut, I want to show you just how to paint a really nice, watery, loose-looking watercolor sky with transparent watercolor with some big cumulus clouds. And we're going to spend a few minutes discussing the physics of a cloud. Clouds are actually three-dimensional. Quite often we see paintings where they've put some water down and they put some color in and they blotted out a few cloud shapes. So you get the general impression of a cloud, but sometimes you don't get the real feeling of a three-dimensional object. Clouds are dense. They usually have a shadow on the bottom. These are the things that can really enhance your landscape, especially if the sky is the main focal point, which a lot of landscapes have a very low horizon. You get that big cloudy sky, and it really is a very strong and dominant part of the painting. So what I'm going to do today is a quick little study of a sky with a very low horizon, and we're going to just barely suggest a little ground with a few bushes or trees. Everything else will be sky. But the main emphasis is going to be on painting a big, bold, dramatic cumulus cloud formation, maybe 2 or 3 big clouds. And I'm going to show you my approach for doing this. It's a technique that works pretty well. It takes a few practice runs, like most of these techniques do. But once you've done it a few times and it sinks in how to do it and you get the brush technique right, the sky's the limit, literally. So let's take a look at the tools we're going to use. Coming over to the palette, I have a set of primary colors, and I'm using cyan blue, primary blue cyan, to paint most of the sky with. It's a very, very clean, very pure, transparent blue color. So let's just get a lot of that mixed up. Now I'm also going to put just a little tiny bit of violet in some of these clouds. I'm taking just a little bit of permanent violet bluish and mixing up a nice watery mix of that. We're not going to use a lot of that, but sometimes just a little touch here and there gives the cloud a little more interest. And I'm also using Payne's Gray. Now Payne's Gray is a color I don't use a lot, but when I do use it, I have very specific purposes for using it. And in this case, the Payne's Gray will be the shadow on the bottom side of the cloud. So let's get a nice little pool of Payne's Gray mixed together. I also have 2 containers for water, one that I clean my brushes in, one that I keep clean water on hand to introduce clean water to my painting. And I have this great tool right here, which is a roll of toilet tissue with paper towel wrapped around it. It's probably the best tool you'll have in your entire collection is this. They take about 30 or 40 cents to make, and they can save your painting, because I use these to make sure I haven't got too much water in my brush before I put a wet brush on my paper when I'm working wet on wet. I can just take this and just tap the brush like this, and I still have the color on the end of the brush, but it takes the excess water out of the brush. So I use this quite frequently. Coming over to the drawing table, I have a piece of Fabriano 140-pound cold pressed paper, which is mounted with plain masking tape on a piece of gator board, just a very lightweight mounting board. Now the brushes I'm using for this demonstration are brushes I designed. I'll be using the 2-inch flat and the 1-inch flat. These are a nylon brush, very thin profile. And I'm also going to use these. Now these are other brushes I designed, and these are a very stiff bristle brush. I use these a lot for blending. And when you're painting skies particularly, you want these very soft blended edges. So I'll be going back and forth between the 1-inch and the 1.5-inch stiff bristle brush and the 2-inch and the 1-inch flat brushes. But first, let's do a little pencil sketch and find out exactly how we're going to lay this landscape out. As I mentioned earlier, I'd like to have a low horizon and lots of skies. Let's put the horizon down about right here. So we know this is all going to be ground. This is all going to be sky. So this leaves a lot of room to put some beautiful cloud shapes. And let's just see how far we can push this concept. And I'm not going to do a whole lot of painting down here because this demonstration really is primarily on the clouds. We will put a few background trees, maybe a few grassy shapes, almost as though you're looking at across a wide vista of some distant tree lines and so forth. But the main emphasis is going to be on this area right here. So we've got some decisions to make now. I mean, we've got several choices. Do we start on wet paper or do we start on dry paper? Do we start with a very dark wash or a very light wash? My suggestion usually is to start with a very light wash, especially when you're doing clouds, because these clouds, although they're white, they still have color in them. And if you look at the clouds, go outside on a really clear day when it's a big cloud formation, And take a piece of white paper, a piece of very bright white paper, and hold that up next to the sky, and you'll see how much color there is in the clouds. We always think of clouds as being very white, but they're really not. There's beautiful cream colors, there's purples, there's blues, there's lots of mauve colors. And if you can incorporate these into your painting, especially as a watercolorist, your painting has a much warmer look and sometimes a much more dramatic look. So let's start this piece on wet paper. And I think what I'm going to do is take my 2-inch flat brush. I'm going to wet it from the ground up, all the way from the top of the painting down to the horizon line with clean water. This will give me a nice, clean, flowing application of color. I'm taking it right down to the tree line or the horizon line. Now while that's wet, I also want to take this. This is the medium, the 1.5 inch stiff bristle brush. I want this brush to be clean. And I've got a Kleenex in my hand, and I'm squeezing most of the water out of that brush. I want this brush that's barely damp, just enough that it'll move the paint around, but not introduce water into the paint or the paper. So let's take this 2-inch brush now and start introducing some of the primary blue cyan. And on that wet paper, of course, it fades out quite a bit because we have 3 things that work. The brush has water, the paint has water, and the paper has water. So all 3 are kind of working in sync right now. And we're getting this very, very smooth wash of color. And we can almost start forming now where the clouds are going to be. For example, we want a bottom of a cloud down here, for example, hanging kind of low on the ground. Now we can start using a little bit thicker color and start coming in around these clouds with that cyan blue. Now we're starting to really start building some clouds. And this is actually just a big negative shape. We're creating this cloud as a negative shape, and by going around it, negative shapes where you paint a dark around a lighter shape. And before my paper gets too dry, let's also take just a little bit of that Payne's gray that I mixed and come down here and put a bottom on the clouds. Remember, they do have a bottom, and the bottom is usually away from the sunlight, which means it has a little bit of a little shadow into the cloud. Now I'm going to take the stiff bristle brush, the one that's barely damp. I'm going to come in just very lightly, soften some of these edges. And you may not hear this on the microphone, but you can actually hear this brush kind of scrubbing into the paper. And I'm softening that shadow so it kind of comes right up into the cloud. So we're already starting to get a little bit of a cloudy thunderhead kind of look. Now let's take the 1-inch brush. This is the 1-inch flat brush. Let's take a little bit of that violet and a little bit more of the blue. Use the blotter so it's not dripping wet. Get that excess water out. Now let's come in and really start putting in some darker color behind this cloud. I'm thinking about the outside edge of that cloud. As I've mentioned before in other demonstrations, the outside edges are very important because they're what tell the story. Now let's do a little softening. So the idea behind these clouds is we want some edges to be somewhat hard and some edges soft. So you just get a nice balance of hard and soft edges, and you start developing a very strong cloud by doing this, a very strong sky. And if you look inside the cloud, there's lots of color in here. But yet you also have just a lot of movement on the outside edge, which says there's a big billowy thunderhead or a big cloud coming in. Now before that dries, let's take some more of that Payne's gray and come down at the bottom of the cloud. And once again, make that shadow a little darker. Now we got the big cloud well established. And I'm taking some of that shadow right up into the cloud in a few places. I'm taking the bristle brush that's clean, and I'm scrubbing it in. Now the cloud has depth, it has dimension. And this is a little bit more of a convincing cloud than had I just blotted out a white shape on the paper. Down below the cloud, it wouldn't hurt to put just a little bit of color along the horizon, right in this area. And again, I can take the damp brush, kind of scrub that out. Bristle brushes are very strong tools when you're painting with watercolors because they really bite into the paper. They get into the tooth of the paper and they move a lot of paint around, and they do it very quickly. Now I'm just taking a little bit more of the Payne's gray and kind of working these shapes a little bit, suggesting even a few more clouds way off in the distance. And I think I'll wash that bristle brush out and get some more Kleenex. And again, squeeze the water out of it. That's so important. And come in here and just start doing some more blending. You got a very strong cloud now with a little bit of blue on the horizon. And since we're kind of playing with this different ideas, let's put a little bit of a suggestion of a tree line along the horizon. I'm taking some brown steel to grain, which is a very clean, transparent brown. And I'm taking some of the permanent green deep. Let's suggest a little tree line way off in the distance. Now I'm doing this for two reasons. One, it gives me a chance to kind of make the scene look a little bit more complete, but also this gives this cloud a sense of scale. By putting that little tree line back there, we know trees are pretty tall, and when you put something like this along the horizon, it really does give everything a sense of scale. You realize just how big that cloud is now in comparison to the landscape. That's an old trick the great masters used to do. I've been studying a lot of their works for years. And quite often you'll see these big grandiose paintings of Yosemite and this and that, and they'll show a little guy sitting on a rock or an Indian on a rock or something. He's there to give that whole thing a sense of scale. Because we all know how big a human is. And when you put that little suggestion of a person in your painting, it lets you realize just how big everything else is. Now let's just come in here and put this little bit of Golden Lake. We're just kind of suggesting there's some foreground grass. We're making a big field. And I'm using the bristle brush again. This is the medium bristle brush. It gets there and just moves that paint around very easily and very quickly. In fact, we're going to be doing a free art lesson on how to paint grass using these bristle brushes, so be sure to look for that. You'll see some of this technique explained in better detail. So, and of course, things typically get darker as they come forward, so I'm putting a little bit more dark in the foreground. Just a little bit, just to kind of give this thing a little bit of a landscape feel. So now if you look at it in its entirety, you do sense you can walk out across this field. There's a distant row of trees way off in the distance. And the cloud now has some weight because it does have that dark shadow on the bottom. And there's also other clouds which are behind it. You can't see the cloud, but you can see the shadows of the clouds. It kind of takes you off in the distance. And this has a very soft, billowy, cloudy kind of a feel. It's a great way to paint clouds. Try a few of these. It takes practice. Everything takes practice. You do a few of these and give yourself a learning curve. Say you do 5 or 6, you'll eventually get it. And it's a great way to paint. If you want to paint a sunset using the same technique, you could easily do that by just putting a few magenta colors into it, a few golds and yellows and so forth. It's a wonderful technique, and it works like a charm every time once you get the hang of it, and I know you will. If you have a chance, please look at my website, sterlingedwards.com, and while you're there, look at the calendar page. I might be doing a workshop somewhere near you, and I would love to have a chance to meet you. And keep your eye open for those new brushes. They're coming out very soon. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed this, and I hope you have.